Right. Hello, everybody. Happy Halloween of 2022. I know it has been at least a good month, probably a good month and a half since I last got on here, but I wanted to at least come in here for the semi-annual little Halloween video, which last year I understand I really did not get to do one, so I wanted to make sure I got it done this year. And of course, since it is Halloween, don't question it. But So for this year's Halloween video, what I wanted to cover is actually a topic that I had originally planned to cover last year at this time, but due to how things got going around at the time, I never really got the chance to get to it. So we ended up pushing it off to next year. And this is not really a well, it is a weird topic, but this isn't one of the lesser known topics. This is a very famous incident in history, and it's none other than the Salem Witch Trials. Unfortunately, I did not have a witch's hat, or else I would have wore one, but no. But that is what we're going to cover this time, is the Salem Witch Trials. This is a legitimate, like, this spawns the modern fear of witches in a way, but at the same time, it's also a syllable for why we have certain things, such as the First Amendment, where you can worship who you want, even if it's this bad. But the Salem Witch Trials is what we're going to cover. So, of course, if anyone with a fleeting knowledge of this did happen back in the 1690s up in Massachusetts. This is word of, I hate to bomb everyone's expectations, but no, there is no Sanderson sisters in this. The Sanderson sisters from Hocus Pocus did not exist. They're not real. They never existed. But there were female witches that were supposedly basically devil worshippers, and were tried. Now, whether or not they were full-on witches is another thing. And plus, witches did not fly on brooms. We do not have any kind of correlation with the historical record that anyone ever actually believed that. That is something of pop culture. So, the Salem Witch Trials is going to occur in the 17th century Massachusetts. This is the very end of the 17th century Massachusetts, so the very end of the 1600s. And Massachusetts at this time is an English colony. The United States is not existent yet. It's still got a good 80 years yet before the War of Independence will break out. But Massachusetts is populated by the Puritans, and if you don't know what a Puritan is, think of a pilgrim. A pilgrim is somewhat like a Puritan, but at the same time they are different, but similar in dress. The Puritans were a very, very big Christian sect that had come over from England. They had kind of been persecuted over in England for their religious beliefs in Christianity. They were not strict followers, really, always of the Anglican Church's ways. They kind of charted their own path a little bit, and this led to them having conflict back there. So during the first half of the 17th century, many of them came over and settled in the New England colonies, such as Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island. What is another one here? New Hampshire. All those were the New England colonies that these Puritans kind of set up on their own. And Massachusetts was probably, I think, the earliest one. Now, the Puritans were very devout Christians. They did not like, in any way, shape, or form, anyone that was not openly Christian, or anyone that did not go to church on a regular basis, anyone that believed in anything other than that. They were very strict on their religion, the way it was, and if you did not adhere to it, you were pretty much not welcome to stay in that community. They were very strict on who was allowed to stay in the Puritan communities if you even did one thing that was thought by the Puritan church to be blasphemous in their view. Now, the Puritans, they are going to, of course, due to their devout Christianity, they fear one pervading evil over anything else, and that is none other than the devil, Satan. They constantly feared the devil and his acts, and believed that he was always trying to infiltrate and destroy their communities in some way or shape or form. Now, they believed that the devil could take many forms. He could morph into animals. They believed that he could morph into other people, that he was constantly going around trying to deceive people and trying to infiltrate their communities and bring just chaos to their settlement and colonies that they had up in New England. So they're constantly on the watch for this, and this is also part, in a way, of the larger European sense of Christianity that had really pervaded since the 1300s, where they kind of started going on witch hunts, and that was basically where they think someone is worshiping the devil and practicing black magic, and they go around trying to hunt for the person and hopefully find them and kill them or whatever it may be. But this has been a phenomenon in Europe since at least 1300. They had actually believed that they could go around and hunt witches and actually eliminate them. So this is not anything new to European culture, but now it's just being transferred over to the New World. Now, the Puritans, of course, since they constantly have this mindset that the devil is trying to get into their communities and trying to destabilize them in any way they can, they have a lot of stress on their hands. And it doesn't help that they also had some other factors that cause stress that we have to address these because these are also, as I think as we know now, the Salem witch trials were largely a product of hysteria. There was no factual basis that anyone was accused or executed was actually a witch. They were merely a product of mass hysteria, and unfortunately 19 people ended up dying for it. But some other factors that might have put some stress on the Puritans and their communities were, for example, and the royal charter for the Massachusetts Bay Colony was actually revoked in 1684 by King Charles II. It was revoked. Originally, Massachusetts was a charter colony, and in 1684, King Charles II, who had just been restored to the throne in the English monarchy as a whole in 1660, decides that he's going to revoke that charter because the colonists' provisions for the Massachusetts Bay Colony Charter are discriminatory toward Anglicans, toward the main Church of England. And basically, the king has to issue the charters. So King Charles said, okay, if you're going to basically discriminate against people here in England for following the church that I'm the head of, then I'm revoking your charter because that is not how I'm going to let you operate. You're not going to get a charter from me and then persecute my church. On top of this, the new charter, which was eventually drawn up as 1691, just 1 year before the Salem witch trials would even start, was much more anti-religious than the Puritans would have liked, and it combined the colony with neighboring ones like Plymouth. Plymouth had been its own colony that the Pilgrims had started. Plymouth and Massachusetts Bay were two different colonies at one point until 1691 when the two were merged. Now, the Puritans viewed the new charter, since it had kind of delved away from the religious views of God and Christianity, they viewed it as an attack on their religion and that they were losing control of their colony. They did not want to lose control of their colony. They came over here to seek religious freedom, to get away from the king, and here it is, the king's pretty much still telling them what to do and is still having authority over them, and now they're being forced to write a charter for it that will allow people who are not part of the Puritan communities to come live in Massachusetts, and they can't do anything about it. So they very much have this sense that we're losing control of the colonies that we came over here to found for the purpose of religious freedom. Now, the Puritans also went through a recent smallpox epidemic, which was quite common back in the colonial days, just before this happened, and they also had growing rivalries in many communities between colonial families that was also beginning to occur. So that brings us up to about January of 1692, and this is where the start of the ill-fated witch trials will begin. And just before, as we go on here, just as a word of fact, many of these symptoms that we're going to discuss here very shortly, that they all started out with a group of girls that supposedly had these symptoms of just acting strange behavior that was not considered normal. If we really look at it, some of the people that historians and other researchers have really pinpointed that some of these strange, unusual symptoms that everyone attributed to be a sign of the demonic. I mean, we know what signs of the demonic are, but these do not seem to be in that category. From what they have found, it could be things they could be attributed to actual side effects of things like epilepsy, Lyme disease, cold weather, factionalism, socioeconomic hardships, family rivalries, and fraud can all be attributed to the Salem witch trials as a cause. If we really delve into it much further. So where does this all begin? So we get to January 1692, and this is when a group of young girls in Salem become ill after playing a fortune-telling game, and they begin to behave strangely. The three girls, two of them, I believe, were the main pastor's daughter. Samuel Parris was the main priest. He was the main pastor in Salem, and he had two daughters and their friend, and they were the three original girls that had begun fortune telling. Now, this was not looked upon very brightly by the church. The church viewed fortune telling as dangerous because they believed that it could be easily manipulated by devils, by demons, and it could be a sign of the devil. So they really did not look upon it as, excuse me, as a very good hobby. They kind of were seen as somewhat evil, but they didn't say nothing originally. So these three girls end up doing fortune telling, and eventually they start exhibiting these strange symptoms that no one can really seem to explain how or what they are. But they're also not the only girls in the community who are showing them. The names of the afflicted girls that I was able to find were Elizabeth Booth, Elizabeth Hubbard, Mercy Lewis, Betty Paris, Ann Putnam Jr., who was the friend of Betty Paris, who was the daughter of the priest. Then we also had Susanna Sheldon, Abigail Williams, Mary Walcott, and Mary Warren. All these women, all them women, were exhibiting these strange symptoms for, as they called them, fits. They said that they would be hiding under furniture, they were contorting in pain and experiencing fevers, making odd animal noises at times in the kitchen or whatever else during at dinner. They were just acting odd, and the Puritans called them, they were having these fits. Now, modern theories would suggest that the girls suffered from either epilepsy, boredom, child abuse, mental illness, or even a fungus disease could be possible. Now, how that one fits in, I don't know. In February, Samuel Paris, Betty Paris's father, he called for a doctor to examine his daughter, to examine some of the girls that had been exhibiting these fits of odd behavior. And the doctor could find nothing wrong with the girls medically, and it was actually the doctor who was the first one to suggest that the girls had been bewitched, that someone had put a curse on them. Now, two of the girls of the original three named the women. They were questioned. There was a public inquiry after this statement by the doctor, and to the girl, and they asked the girls, like, "Who do you think is bewitching you? Who is bewitching you?" They wanted to know, and two of the girls end up naming three women in particular: Sarah Good, Sarah Osborne, and Tituba. Now, Tituba was the slave of Reverend Paris. Reverend Paris had a slave. So this was, and the funny thing is, Tituba was from Barbados, where voodoo culture was quite common. And it is thought as a possibility that the three girls originally started practicing fortune telling, possibly after hearing the tales of like voodoo rituals from Tituba, who had come from the Caribbean and where that culture and religion flourished. So it's thought that maybe that's where they got the idea to do the fortune telling, but it's not for certain. Now, as for Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne, these were one had been in a love affair, which was not very well seen by the Puritan Church, and the other was an elderly woman who was constantly bedridden. Both women were pretty much social outcasts. Neither of them attended church on a regular basis, so they were very easy targets to point at a finger at for accusation because these were not well liked members of the community, and they would be the first people that they would probably be likely to blame. So on March 1st, the three women were arrested and then examined: Sarah Good, Sarah Osborne, and Tituba. Now, Tituba confessed being approached by Satan, that she had been approached by the devil. But she said that he had also appeared to the other two women because there had been a black man out of Boston. She had seen the devil in his two animal forms. She had seen a black man come to her in Boston who asked her to sign the devil's book. And among the names in the devil's book of his followers were the names of the two other women, Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne. And she stated that all three had agreed to do his bidding as witches. Now, Tituba later would go on to say that she was in fear of her own life because they pretty much tortured these women as they're trying to, after they had arrested them and were interrogating them. So there's really doubt on whether or not that is true because she very much could have been she's being tortured, and plus she knew as her status was a slave, she would be more likely to just be killed right off the bat. So she was in fear for her own life and might have just said anything that they say. Because this is significant, because as we're going to mention again later as a reminder, the Puritans, if you confessed to being a witch in the Puritan community, you actually would be spared. The court and the people of the town would not hang you. They would not execute you, because the Puritan belief was that if you actually openly confessed, then any punishment that you get would be the decision of God. God would punish you. If you tried to lie and tried to deny that you were in any way a witch, then they were more likely to hang you. Now, Tituba's confession is what begins the entire witchcraft hysteria, because she is saying that she has seen the devil himself, she has seen Satan, and that he has visited members of this community, and this starts the whole town into a witchcraft hysteria that rapidly spreads throughout town and even into some of the surrounding communities. And since Tituba had also mentioned that there had been a devil's book with more than 19 names on the book sign sheet, including the names of the two other women, there was also the fear, now growing among Salem people, that we have other witches in town because there's more names in this book, supposedly. So during March, there ends up being 4 more women arrested in March of 1692, and these 4 other women were Rebecca Nurse, Martha Corey, Dorothy Good, and Rachel Clinton. Now, many historians do believe that the parents of the afflicted girls, such as Thomas Putnam and Reverend Parris, edged the girls on to accuse specific people within the community who they disliked as revenge. These are men who hold a lot of power in the community, so they want to eliminate their rivals. Well, right now is a perfect opportunity. You simply tell your daughters, oh yeah, tell them that she's the one that bewitched you, that she's the one that cursed you. Tell them that. And then they'll probably kill her, and we won't have to worry about that woman anymore. It was a very easy way to try to get rid of a rival. And so there has been speculation as to whether or not some of these women that the girls named, who they seemingly had no contact with, but their parents would have, were told to tell the trials this by their own parents. April leads to even more accused women that end up being accused of being witches, and this is actually also the first time in April that we see some men get accused of being witches. And among the people that we have indicted here, from the names that we could find, are Sarah Cloyce, Elizabeth Proctor, John Proctor, Giles Corey, Abigail Hobbs, Deliverance Hobbs, William Hobbs, Bridget Bishop, Sarah Wilds, Nehemiah Abbott Jr., Mary Etsy, Edward Bishop, Sarah Bishop, Mary English, Philip English, Reverend George Burroughs, Lydia Dustin, Susanna Martin, Dorcas Hoare, and Sarah Morey. Now, the funny thing is, Reverend George Burroughs had actually been a previous pastor in the Salem community up until about 1683, and he'd actually gone to build himself a new home in Maine. But somehow, during the trials, someone managed to convince the court that was convened under the governor's orders. The governor convened a special court for Salem, Massachusetts, to try these witches and to actually purge the community of witchcraft. Yes, this came from the governor. That'd be like here in Ohio, Mike DeWine doing a witchcraft trial and say, okay, I need a court set up in Columbus because I need to try for witches in the state. So I need everyone to go to Columbus. I need you to have a witchcraft trial set up, and I need you to start going around the state searching for witches and people that are worshiping devil worshippers. It'd be odd, but it happened. So the royal governor is who sets up this court to try these accused women and men. And Reverend George Burroughs had somehow said that he was somehow the ringleader of these supposed witches in Salem, so they literally grabbed him all the way from his home in Maine and drug him back to Salem, Massachusetts to be tried as a witch. So the official court was actually set up in May by Governor William Phipps, and it was called the Court of Oyer and Terminer in order to hear the cases. He appointed 8 judges were appointed, with a ninth was who later then one later resigned, so a ninth was later put in their place. So the judges that we had were Bartholomew Gidney, John Hawthorne, John Richards, William Stoughton, Samuel Sewall, Nathaniel Saltonstall, Peter Sargent, Waitstill Winthrop, and Jonathan Corwin. By the time of the court's convening, over 30 people had been accused and arrested by May and were ready to be tried at this court proceedings. Now, the witch hunt actually did not just happen in Salem. Because of the hysteria, it did spread to other towns such as Amesbury, Andover, Salisbury, Topsfield, Ipswich, Gloucester, Boston. Any of the surrounding communities pretty much had witch hysteria go through them because it was fear that there was even more witches into these other areas that they might have fled to. But in no matter which community they had been, the residents were brought to Salem for trial. That is where the court was. So that no matter if they had been from Boston or wherever else, they were still brought to Salem for their official trial. By June, the number of arrests and accusations had actually begun to decline in Salem, but there was still over 200 witches still being held in local jails. And the Salem jail was a wooden structure with a dungeon beneath, and actually it was quite small. So you had over 200 people packed in small little jail cells in this wooden little structure. And I mean packed like sardines. There were people that died just in custody because they were being kept in these cramped, crowded conditions with very little food or water or any kind of health provisions. So there were people that died during these witch trials not as a result of execution, but as a result of just being held in custody. They were usually chained to the wall as well. Now, the officials thought that by chaining the people to the wall, you could keep their spirits from escaping the jail to torment their victims. Now, how that works, I don't know. It was 17th century Massachusetts. They had some crazy ideas. The pretrial exams would be held in front of a judge and the jury, which would decide whether or not to indict the accused as a witch. If the indicted, if indicted, the person would get no lawyer. They could not have no lawyer, no legal counsel to help them, and they basically had to plead and defend their case on their own. They had to defend for themselves. They had no right to a legal counsel, no right to a lawyer or anything. If you were indicted as a witch, you had to defend yourself in front of the judges. Not real easy at all. And you had two choices. You either plead guilty or not guilty. Now, some community members did not believe in the witchcraft craze. There was quite a few of them, actually, that did not. But the problem comes that they knew that if they publicly declared that they did not believe that the witchcraft was real, they would often end up being accused themselves. So it was kind of the point, okay, I might not believe in this, but if I speak up, I'm probably going to get thrown in with the rest of them. So I'm just going to keep my mouth shut. The trial ended up being held in the Salem courthouse. Now, the first person to actually be executed was Bridget Bishop, who she was the first actually on trial of the women, and she said that the three women had said that Bridget Bishop had physically hurt them and tried to make them sign a pact with Satan. And the funny thing is, Bridget Bishop had actually been accused of witchcraft about 12 years earlier and had actually been tried and actually cleared. She had been acquitted. She had actually escaped innocent through that time. But here she is 12 years later getting tried for another charge of witchcraft. Now, Bridget maintained her innocence throughout her entire trial, but she was eventually convicted and she was hanged on June 10th of 1692 as the first official trial victim. Four more would be hanged the following month, including Rebecca Nurse, who had been a well-respected and beloved member of Salem. And people really did not think that she was a witch, but they couldn't tell the judges that. If they told the judges that, they're dead. Now, Nurse, ironically, she had originally been declared innocent by the judges, but the afflicted girls during her trial or who were in the room, they ended up having fits in the courtroom as her verdict is being read. And this causes one of the judges, Judge Stoughton, to actually ask the jury to reconsider, which, when they reconsider, given this supposed fact of these girls are having fits in the courtroom when she's getting her sentence handed down, they convict Rebecca as guilty about a week later. Now, the funny thing is with this witch trial is they were allowing something called spectral evidence. Basically anything that pertained to a supernatural nature. So basically, this happened because a demon scratched me. What evidence do you have to do of that? A demon scratched me, sir. That was evidence to them. That is why this kind of went so haywire, because you could literally make up anything and claim that, oh my goodness, you see this bruise? I might have hit myself, but it was a demon, I swear. There were people that would do that, and the court would take this as legitimate evidence. Now, we know in a courtroom today, there is no way in any possible direction that a judge of this country is going to take in evidence of the spiritual nature, because it's impossible to prove. But this is what they were taking on, and they were taking on spectral evidence for a while, which is why so many people got executed for no good reason at all. Now, one of those brutal executions ends up actually being that of Giles Corey. He pleads innocent to the point that to try to force a confession out of him, they basically strip him naked, put him on the ground with a board on his back with heavy stones on top of it, and then they try to force him to plead guilty. And Giles does not do so, and eventually the weight becomes so much that he ends up actually being crushed to death by the stones on his back. So Giles Corey was literally pressed to death between stones because he would not. He was telling his innocence, and because he would not plead guilty, they basically executed him to death. Another funny method I think that they used for witch hunting, I don't know if they did it during the Salem Witch Trials, but they would take you on a long board and kind of dip you under the water. If you drowned, that meant you weren't a witch. I mean, you're human, you drowned. But if you were a witch, you would come back up and you would float. And then we're going to kill you anyway. Now, in September, which is about the time that Giles Corey was killed, this is when the spectral evidence gets wiped out, because it actually started, the trials ended up being continued into August, and many of the accused were ended up being tortured to force pleas from them, and many began to have a doubt whether this had actually committed witchcraft. They began to really question the idea of letting spectral evidence be in the courtroom. And there were people in all the communities that started kind of lobbying the judges and the governor to make a new court that would not allow for spectral evidence. Now, initially, they were very resistant to this, but the governor had a very big change of heart when his wife got somehow accused of being a witch. It was a rumor. She was never indicted, but when he started hearing that his wife was being accused of, he's like, okay, I'm putting an end to this now, because now it's hurting me. So he goes ahead and dissolves this court and forms a new court that specifically states that they will not allow spectral evidence to be admissible as possible evidence to use in the court case. The last 8 people of the Salem Witch Trials ended up being hanged on September 22nd. And on October 29th of 1692, the court ended up being dismissed. Now, the remaining 52 people who were left that have been accused were later found by another court to be not guilty, and they were pardoned by the governor. Actually, if I remember right, 3 of them actually were found guilty, but they were pardoned too. So no one else, even though the 3 of them got guilty, none of them got executed. So in total, we had 19 people who ended up being executed in the Salem Witch Trials. We had Bridget Bishop, Sarah Good, Elizabeth Howey, Susanna Martin, Rebecca Nurse, Sarah Wilds, George Burroughs, Martha Carrier, Mary Etsy, John Willard, Georges Jacobs Sr., John Proctor, Alice Parker, Mary Parker, Ann Prudater, Wilmot Red, Margaret Scott, Samuel Wardwell, Martha Curry, and Giles Corey. Martha and Giles both, they were husband and wife, both got executed as witches. Now, very shortly after the witch trials had completed, there was a very big realization that we had gone astray. And in 1697, the General Court of Massachusetts actually had issued for a day of fasting in remembrance of the atrocity and tragedy of the trials. And later on, some of the judges later even said that their judgments had been wrong. And this was all starting about the early 18th century. And in fact, Massachusetts in 1711, not even a full 20 years after the trials, cleared a bill that passed a bill that would clear the names of majority of the convicted witches. It cleared the majority of them and forgave them, and even gave monetary compensation to the families of those who had actually perished in the trials. But funny enough, this was expanded in 1957. In 1957, Massachusetts, the state of Massachusetts, officially passed a bill that apologized for the Salem witch trials, but the last two people were not exonerated until 2001, way after the fact, almost over 200 years after. But this is just the Salem witch trials was just odd. Witches were supposed to be worshiping the devil. They were supposed to be followers of Satan who had sold their soul to him in order to perform black magic. They were supposed to go fly about at night to go to secret meetings or other worse things. But none of these women ever did that. None of them. Plus, that's not even what a real witch does. There are witches, but they don't act like that. I mean, in the regards of flying. But none of these people had any actual part where they were concrete witches. It was mass hysteria and a way for people to get rid of those that they hated, because the easiest way to escape persecution and execution at the Salem witch trials, if someone accused you of being a witch, your easiest way to say it was, well, I only did it because he bewitched me. They would prosecute that person instead of you, because they take it like, well, you admitted that you made him do it, but you're saying that you were bewitched. So it must be that man. But they would do that, and it was just ridiculous. The Salem witch trials, even today, is it's an embarrassment in American history. It shows how bad Christianity at times can be taken to a far extreme. Now, I'm a Christian myself. I'm not trying to make it a big wine fest against Christianity. Christianity is my own religion. But there are times in human history where I think we have taken religion far beyond its limit, far too far, and this was one of those cases. Innocent people died for no reason because we took it too far. And of course, we've had modern arts and pop culture movies and stuff have been made and shows about it. But and of course, most famously, we have Hocus Pocus. I think that's the reason probably half of the millennial and Generation Z generations are even familiar with the Salem witch trials, is because they've watched Hocus Pocus around Halloween. We know about the tale of the Sanderson sisters, and while that's a fanciful and funny tale, and somewhat scary at times, because you got to really think here. I mean, it's a Disney movie, but at the same time, they are sucking the lives out of children. That's not what the Salem witch trials was. It was not at all what that was at all. But definitely not the brightest chapter in American history, but definitely not the brightest chapter in world history, and kind of a warning as what happens when we really go too far over the line. So that is, I think, all we have for today. For Halloween, I just wanted to go ahead and touch upon what the Salem witch trials were in general. There's plenty more information out there that you can probably find and watch. I mean, there's God knows how many things have been made about it. But I encourage you to look that up on your own if you're that more curious about it. So I think I don't know. I mean, it honestly, I don't want to say I'm going to do another video next week, because it honestly depends when I got time to do it. But I guess until the next time that we get to it, we'll get to it. So, as always, any questions or comments, go ahead and leave them in the comment section below, and I'll be happy to answer them. Any suggestions is also gladly received if any of them come through. But that pretty much, I think, wipes it out and clears it for this video. So, as always, have a good rest of your week. Have a good Halloween in general. Have a very good Halloween. Can't believe it's almost over already. We're almost getting to Christmas and Thanksgiving. But have a wonderful rest of your week. Have a wonderful Halloween, and may God bless you all.